you from whatever parts of the state that you came from. We appreciate that. The time is 9:06. And today is Friday, February 3rd, and I will call this meeting to order. I will lead us in the pledges. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. We laugh every time. Every time. I got halfway through reading. We will now have roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martin McGill-Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Present.
Rolando Castro.
Present.
Paola Escalante Castillo.
Present.
Mark McAnally.
Present.
Stephanie Robinson. And Lisa Sprinkle.
Present.
We have one board member that is absent today. Ms. Robinson couldn't get in from Dallas. Several people are still stuck in the Metroplex area. I would request a motion to excuse her absence.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that we excuse her absence.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. McAnally. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. I'd like to take a moment to note that if anybody wishes to speak today, that they must complete, if it's a non-agenda item, you must complete a public meeting comment slip. So you can get one of those outside of the front door, and you can hand it to Ms. Dion over here at this side desk over here. I have asked Mr. Bolton to open the meeting with our mission moment.
I'm going to do something a little different today, and it's pretty simple, but it's an acknowledgement of the progress that this agency has made over the last several years, and with obviously the participation of the board in crafting policy, but everything from customer service to the decreasing enforcement or disciplinary action, the time it takes to investigate and adjudicate those things, the fact that now when you call this agency, somebody picks up the phone. It's not always the case. But I just want to acknowledge the immense time, energy, and effort and guidance that the board has given, but especially for the agency. And that's it. That's my mission moment.
Thank you, sir. I second that. Agenda item number 4 is the election of vice chair and secretary. At our December meeting, Mr. Bolton nominated Mrs. Reed Lynch for vice chair and Mr. McAnally for secretary. We can also consider any nominations from the floor today if there are any additional nominations. Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the nominations of Ms. Reed Lynch for vice chair and Mr. McAnally for secretary?
I'll second it.
We need a motion first.
Let me get.
Do you want to do the motion first?
Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to do it? Okay. Madam Chair, I put a motion forward to have the election of the vice chair and secretary be Mrs. Reed Lynch and Mr. McAnally.
There we go. I'll second it.
We have a motion to accept the nominations by Mr. Castro and a second by Mr. Black. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. We look forward to you joining us on the executive, Mr. McAnally. And we appreciate Mr. Bolton's years of service.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5 is the committee appointments. After consultation with my fellow board members, the Budget and Finance Committee will include Ms. Escalante Castillo, Mr. McAnally, and Ms. Robinson continuing to serve as chair. The Education and Licensing Committee will be comprised of Ms. Sprinkle, Ms. Robinson, and Mr. Castro serving as chair. The Enforcement Committee will be, for now, Mr. Black, Mr. Castro, and Mr. Bolton continuing to serve as chair. And now that Mr. McAnally is going to be on the Executive Committee, I've asked Mr. Bolton to serve as our representative on the TREC and TALC Joint Audit Committee. And so I know that Mr. McAnally will help you transition onto that committee. And we appreciate that, that help.
Thank you, Marty.
I appreciate everyone for volunteering for these committees. As you all know, a lot of the work gets done there. We're able to spend some time really delving into some topics before they come before the full board. So we appreciate everybody taking the time and volunteering to serve on those committees. As a reminder to the public, those committees are, they're posted on our website, and they are mostly done by video conference, and you're able to join and listen in and participate. And we welcome that from the public. Agenda item number 6 is discussion and possible action regarding appointment of mentors. This list is on page 9 of your materials, and it's followed by the applications. Mrs. Santos.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, Kathleen Santos, General Counsel. As you mentioned, this is the item regarding the appointment of mentors. This begins on page 9, and just a little bit of a recap. Historically, the board has appointed mentors at its February meeting every 2 years, and who these mentors are experienced certified appraisers who work with respondents who need some remedial education, or potentially in the context of an applicant, we can contingently grant approval for a license upon the completion of mentorship. So with that, they perform very important functions for the agency. The list of applicants include individuals who were appointed as mentors at the last cycle, and then there are 3 additional names that have applied at the recommendation of other mentors and other as a result of some targeted messaging that our communications director has identified those who could potentially qualify to serve. So staff's recommendations here is to appoint all of the applicants. I did want to note that one of the candidates technically is 37 days short of that 10-year license in Texas requirement. This is also an individual that previously served as a mentor before that specific qualification was put in place, and she's also been licensed in other jurisdictions for 30 years. But with that, in reviewing the application, we found that she did substantially comply with that 10-year requirement, but that it's still a recommendation to go ahead and include her in those appointments. And if there are any concerns, you could also wait 37 days before anyone is assigned to her or chooses her as a mentor. But I'm available for any questions if you have any.
Very good. And we certainly appreciate the outreach on staff's part to try and add mentors to this list. We had gotten some feedback from our license holders that they were having trouble at some time, at different times, finding a mentor that was available. Of course, they have regular jobs, and so they're not always available. So increasing this list was something that we were really trying to do, and we appreciate all the applicants and staff for identifying those potential candidates and bringing more into the fold. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Santos about the list? If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board appoint all of the mentors that are listed here to serve as mentors for a period of 2 years.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Castro and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item number 7 is the opportunity for anyone to comment on anything that's not on today's agenda item. And we have received a couple of requests to comment. The first one is Rich Downs from RSDS Valuations. Thank you for coming to speak today. You can, if you would just keep your comments in the 3 to 5 minute range, that would be appreciated.
Thank you for
Good
having me.
morning.
By the way, Mr. Bolton, I would agree with your comments. As someone who's had a lot of involvement with different boards across the country, the work you guys are doing is absolutely outstanding, and you're making it from the appraiser position great to work with, so thank you all very much. I'm here today just to open the discussion and begin the conversation about introducing an appraisal practicum program that we would like to work with the board to move forward in discussion and approval. You know, today there's no commercially available program that would allow a trainee to obtain a license other than under the current supervisory model that exists in the industry. And we all understand what the limitations are of the supervisory model. And so what we have done for the last 2 years is we've gone to work building 4 training centers in California, Arizona, Kansas, and Texas. We have a 5,000 square foot facility in Irving. And over that 2-year period, we've developed a training program, and we've successfully graduated 33 people who've obtained their license or certification. We currently have 25 more trainees in the system across those training centers. And all of those, oh, by the way, one of the greatest parts of that is the majority of our successful graduates are now, come from minorities. And also include a high percentage of women and also military service members. So over 2 years, we feel like we have tremendous experience and we have a proven model that we can successfully train and continue to mentor and guide appraisers to get in this industry that would be different than all the limitations of the supervisory model that exists today. We'd want to work closely with the board. We'd invite the board to come in, meet our team, see our facility, talk to our trainees, and better understand intimately what we can do to accomplish this. It's amazing to me today that in an industry that's this old and this large, that you think about every other profession in the country where you can register and obtain a cosmetology license to a medical degree, but you can't in this industry unless you can find a mentor who's willing to train you. We can solve that. We know we can solve that. We have the team to solve it. We have a support group that has already volunteered to participate in it, that includes everything from former vice president of the foundation, Missouri executive vice chair of the Missouri Real Estate Appraisal Board, a member of the Appraisal Standards Board, Melissa Bond. Melissa Bond has actually developed a practicum that's been approved in the state of Mississippi, but it's only for people in Mississippi and only for people that want to stay in Mississippi. We believe and we're confident that we can create a much wider reach across the entire country, that with the leadership in the vision of the Texas board, we can send a message to the whole country that this is possible and we can salvage this profession, because the numbers today don't look good. I believe the numbers today are around 77% white, 65% male, and 60-some% over the age of 55. Everybody in the profession is looking for ways to get appraisals done that don't include appraisers. We think we've got an opportunity to extend the runway in this profession, create opportunities for minorities, and just break down the barriers to entry. So I don't know what this process looks like. I just wanted to come, share some information. I sent an email to Dion. You all may or may not have that gives you an overview of the program. and an overview of the backdrop of our team and what we've been able to accomplish up to this point in just 2 short years. So we're very excited about the future and would appreciate the dialogue and the support from the Texas Board to go out and pave the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So because this isn't an agenda item, we can't open it up for discussion, but I do want to just ask you a couple of follow-up questions so I know where then to direct this conversation for the future. So are you talking about something, because we're limited obviously to what the AQB allows us to accept for, so is this something outside of what the AQB is currently allowing? I think I'm confused about how it appears to me that it's the traditional supervisor trainee model.
Our goal is to develop a commercially available practicum program where students can apply and come in and get the training that they need to go from, you know, we have the gap. We have the gap of I can take AI courses, I can take McKissick courses, I can win a scholarship with Fannie Mae through the Appraisal Diversity Initiative, but then what? ADI, and we're participating in Phoenix and ADI here in a couple weeks, and we've already hired a member from the ADI scholarship. But they've scholarshiped 475 people, and the last number I heard was about 14 of them have successfully achieved a license. There's a huge gap. We're trying to fill that gap. Whether that is, whether the Standards Board comes before the Texas Board or the Texas Board comes in conjunction with the Standards Board, whatever that process looks like, we'll navigate that. I'm here to just simply introduce the subject and make the Texas Board aware of what we're trying to do and see how we could work together to bring it to reality.
Okay, I think that we're very interested in any kind of solutions to the problem, and so maybe I would direct the Education and Licensing Committee to kind of take this topic up and try and figure out what it is we can do and how we can help, and if we can help.
That would be great.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have a question. Do you have public relations materials or media booklets, you know, for the program?
Just what I had sent over to Dion. I think she forwarded that email.
Okay.
We will have the website launched here probably by Monday.
Okay.
But before we spend 2 years spending money and developing a program that no one's going to approve, we at least want to get the dialogue moving in the right direction.
Right. I understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
We also received a request from Mr. DiBiasio with the Appraisal Institute. Did you bring the cold weather with you from DC? Is that what this is about?
I think it's warmer at home than
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, Scott DiBiasio with the Appraisal Institute. It's good to see you all again. I did want to just come and provide a very brief update on where we stand with AI PAREA. I know that's a topic that has been discussed extensively by the board over the last year or so. And I can tell you that we are very rapidly coming to the point and the time when our PAREA program will be publicly available in the marketplace. We're still committed to a September 2023 delivery deadline, but I can tell you that we are well ahead of schedule on that, and we anticipate submitting to the AQB for approval here within the next couple of months. We do now have a 15-minute video demonstration of our PAREA program. I had sent it over to Ms. Santos a while back, but I would also be, and I'm not sure if she's sent it along to you all or not, but if not, I am more than happy to share that with you offline in a little bit more of a controlled environment, or I can provide you with the URL and the password, and you can take a look at it at your leisure. We've shown it now in a bunch of other states, and it has gone a long way towards giving regulators a little bit greater level of comfort with Perea. And it's not intended to be a sales pitch for AI Perea by any stretch. But what it is intended to be is a demonstration of how one provider has taken what has been provided to us in terms of a framework from the Appraiser Qualifications Board and put some meat on those bones and actually put together a virtual reality computer-based learning program. I think you'll be pretty impressed. It's gone over very well in other states, and like I said, it's given regulators a much greater level of comfort, especially in those states that are, and there's 19 of them, that are still on the fence as it relates to Perea for one reason or the other. We've made great progress in those states after we've shown the video. So I would be more than happy to make that available to you all, and would be more than happy to answer any questions at this point. But we're moving along very rapidly, and hopefully, within the next couple of months, we'll have something. We're going to start out with our LR module, and then follow up a couple of months later with our CR module, just because the CR module obviously is a little bit additional work, and we can get the LR module into the marketplace a little bit quicker. We also have pricing information now related to our Perea program. We had completed a pricing strategy, and again, I'd be more than happy to share that information with you offline as to how much we're going to charge and how we're going to structure that and those kinds of things. So with that, I am done, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Are we closer to sort of a narrow price range, and is that something that you can share?
Yeah. I could share that with you offline. We have a number.
Okay.
And I can tell you some additional things
Okay.
related to just for competitive reasons. I don't want to.
Absolutely. So I understand that. So I wouldn't want you to share it with us if it's not something that we can share with, license holders, because that was my point in asking, is just that when we get so many calls from trainees that we are able to kind of give them a more definitive. So if you're not ready for that, that's fine. Just
No,
put when you-
I'm happy sharing with you individually, and then you can share it as you see fit. And there's a couple of different numbers, and I would be able to
Sure.
explain, what all of those mean. And yeah, I think it is important for licensees to know how much the program's going to cost, so that they can, if they're interested in it, they can
Right.
start preparing for that.
Yeah.
But it's not anything, any number that I haven't already mentioned to you.
Okay.
It's pretty much right on target as to what I thought it was going to be.
And so do you all have the ability at this point, or a running list, so to speak, of people who are interested in it, and then they'll all be notified when it's available?
We don't have a list of our own, but I do know that the Appraisal Foundation has a list of, right now, I guess it's somewhere around 2,000 people that have contacted them with difficulties finding a supervisor, and they then have introduced them to the concept of Perea, and those folks indicated that they may be willing and wanting to participate in a Perea program. So they've started that list, and I think they're going to make it available to the two providers that are going to come to market this year with programs. And it's just AI and McKissick. I'm not sharing anything that's not publicly available there. And then there may be some other providers that come on later on. Those will be primarily AMC providers, though, for their own internal staff and panel development purposes. So the only two programs that will be publicly available are probably going to be AI and McKissick, and I'm guessing that the foundation will share their list with any provider that asks for it.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. DeGracio? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We haven't received any other requests, so we will move on to agenda item number 8, the ratification of the official record of the December 1st, 2022 and December 2nd, 2022 board meetings as approved for posting on the website by the Secretary of the Board. These can be found in your materials starting on page 59. Does anyone have any changes?
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Black. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 9 is the final orders and surrenders in the matters of A, B, C, and D. They start on page 67 of our materials. We did not receive any requests for comment on any of these items. And this does not require any action from the board, but we're open to discuss it or answer any questions about these matters. Hearing none, we will move on to agenda item number 10, the report by the Budget and Finance Committee. Obviously, Ms. Robinson is out today. These start on page 101 of your materials. So in her absence, I would just ask that Ms. Escalante Castillo or Mr. McAnally, if there's anything that you wanted to highlight from the last meeting, that I would give you the opportunity to do so.
I don't have anything else to highlight, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Very good. Agenda item number 11, Mr. Castro, the Education Committee report is on page 105 in our materials. Is there anything that you would like to highlight?
No, not at this time. It's good.
Very good. I did want to mention that during the Education Committee meeting that we talked about the large increase in trainees in 2021 and 2022. And in the last several months, we've seen those applications drop off, which, you know, makes sense considering what's happening in the market right now. A residential appraiser just told me recently it was the slowest it's been in 20 years for him. So, so that certainly makes sense. But we did talk about the fact that we have a greater, in the past, we've sort of hovered in the 900 to 1,000 trainees at any given time, and now we're at about 1,400. And so we talked about the fact that we wanted to continue that momentum and to keep those people in the fold. We know in the past that about a third of them drop out every year. And of course, now with Perea coming online, we're kind of hoping to keep those, you know, have a greater retention rate and keep the momentum going from the surge of trainees. So as Mr. DiBiasio was talking, it was making me think about our discussion about that and about that we were going to be proactive about keeping them in the industry, maybe in a way that we haven't in the past. And so to actually specifically target trainees with outreach and let them know that these Perea programs are coming online, so that if there is a level of frustration that they haven't found a supervisor, or they're feeling like, you know, that there's not opportunities in this industry, to make sure that they know that that is coming online, and any other opportunities like the Fannie Mae scholarship program, those sorts of things. So we're thinking of ways to do some outreach to try and keep more trainees. And along that line, we should probably also, when we have that outreach, start our own list that we can either provide to the foundation so that when they do their announcement of when the programs come out, or our own, but just to keep a running list of people who are interested and try and, you know, continue to give them the resources that they need to join our profession. So we'll keep that dialogue going. On page 109 is the report of the Executive Committee. One of the items that we discussed in executive is going to be under agenda item number 17, so we will talk about it at that time. But I am open to any questions about the Executive Committee report, if there are any. Hearing none, we will move on to agenda item number 13, staff reports. These start on page 113 in our materials. Good morning, Commissioner Buchholz.
Good morning. Tony and I are both going to provide some comments to you today, so I wanted you to be warned of that. It's good to see each of you. This has been quite a week for our agency. This icy weather has really kind of shifted our focus for much of the week. We're finally thawing. Feels like a warm day, nice summer day outside today compared to what it has been. And I just want to take a moment to commend our staff. The hybrid work environment on most days is a significant benefit. We're able to juggle work and keep home going at the same time in a way that we have never seen before. We, reduce our commute, that sort of thing. In inclement weather days, I would tell you that the hybrid work environment becomes quite the curse. What used to be kind of a whimsical winter day where you just drank hot chocolate becomes the juggling of all the things, right? And I just want to acknowledge our staff's kind of rising to that occasion. There was no justification to virtually close. We all worked from home, of course, but we did do our very best to continue to work, to answer phone calls, to run meetings, to do the things that we do from home, while juggling all the other things, family, power outages, weather, trees falling, those types of things. We do have a significant number of staff still without power, but several are here today, have showered elsewhere. I do not hear any complaining. Grace has been extended, and the team has risen to the occasion. So I want to publicly thank them for that effort. I also want to tell you that the exposure draft is finally out in the world and available for review, and that came on the eve of the ice storm. So that is an agenda item that will be discussed later today. We will stay fairly high level because our ability to digest all that is in there was somewhat limited this week. A few other updates for you, and a few of these I've already emailed to you, but I just wanted to make sure to say them to the world publicly. Our ASC priority visit will happen in March, at the end of March. This visit happens every other year on the non-audit years. It's kind of a check-in. All of the big states do it. We check in with our policy manager. It lasts about an hour. It's very informal. We will keep you posted on how that goes, but we're looking forward to that priority contact visit. Additionally, we have received a memo from Jim Park, the ASC Executive Director. I've shared that memo with you. It urges states to evaluate the state-imposed requirements that are over and above what's required by the AQB criteria. I am happy to say that TALCB is ahead of the curve on this. We accept all experience categories approved by the AQB without any sort of cap or limitation. We do not have any additional education requirements, and we're always seeking ways to reduce barriers to entry. Not only does that come from the ASC, but it also comes from our own state, right, to keep barriers to entry low. So I'm very proud of Texas being ahead of the curve on this, and I'm happy to go into more detail on that if you'd like. I'm intrigued with Mr. Downs' proposal on how to bring others into the industry who can't find a supervisor, and we continue to explore those avenues, of course. Additionally, the TALCB notebook, known to you as the Experience Log Portal, is in beta testing. About 20 users, supervisors, and trainees are using that system right now. If you know of anybody else who might like to be part of that beta testing, send those to Melissa. We look forward to having additional testing. We just want to make sure it's good before it is officially out into the world. A few other things I want to point out from your materials in the staff reports, and a few of these, Chair Oates, you highlighted. 16%, we have seen a 16% increase in applications received for certified general, certified residential, and licensed residential credentials compared to fiscal year 2022. There's been a 46% increase in experience audits received. So 152 experience audit received so far this year compared to 104 at this time last year. So we're seeing that increase. I do also want to note that on page 130 of your materials, we have a mistake that has been corrected on the website and then in your electronic materials. But in what you originally received, we had the wrong years listed. We had years 2021 and years 2022. They should have been 2022 and 23. Those appeared in two places on page 130, and they are now corrected in all of the places. Additionally, we have, as Chair Oates mentioned, we've seen a 47% decrease in the training applications received. We think that decrease is likely just a shift in the market, but we certainly don't want to lose the momentum of our current trainee population. We are talking about ways to do outreach, and I wanted to just let you know that we are extending our communications team. Right now that we have a team of 1, Summer Mandel, and we are hiring someone to work alongside her to just allow for additional communications and outreach. I think that's one of the few, well, that's one way in which we can serve our license holder community and the public extensively. And so we're working on that. That position is currently posted. A few more. AMC National Registry mandatory reporting began at the beginning of the year. AMCs who are registered in Texas, and then of course the federally regulated AMCs who are operating in Texas, must report by the end of March. So far, 29% of those AMCs have completed their reporting. That reflects almost $212,000, all of which we will not keep. That goes to the appraisal subcommittee. We will continue that outreach. It's not unusual to see a big flood close to the deadline, end of March. Human behavior, of course. So we've heard from 53 of 180. From an enforcement standpoint, TALCB has received 88 complaints in fiscal year 2023. That's an average of 22 a month, and this is down from the average of 28 a month in fiscal year 2022. So that's a good thing. We've watched this very closely because of the uptick that we had seen previously. The largest source of complaints is government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae, which make up 58% of total complaint volume. There are also 17 complaints in abatement. 11 of those are outside litigation. 6 are pending review by the Texas Workforce Commission Civil Rights Division. We're also processing those complaints within our 180-day goal. Our average is 164 days. 2 operational updates that are agency-wide that I just wanted to mention to you, and then I'll answer any questions you have. The first is the RAMP project. This is our back-end regulatory system that will replace our Versa system. We have been in the procurement phase for forever, and we are now moving into the implementation phase. We selected a vendor. That vendor is Acela, and we are working with Acela to begin that implementation kickoff and expect that this month. Additionally, in early December, all state agencies received a letter from Governor Abbott prohibiting the use of TikTok. That's a social media platform. I don't know much about it. And the governor directed 2 state agencies, DIR, which is basically the state agency that does IT for the state, and DPS, Department of Public Safety, to develop a model plan to outline that prohibition of TikTok on personal devices of state employees. We await the details on that plan. We have not seen that model plan yet. But we have made clear to our employees that we cannot use TikTok on state time, on state resources, on state property. And additionally, we have established the prohibition of the use of TikTok on our network so that it is now blocked as an added layer of protection. That's happening across the country. It seems it's been on the national news, and we are doing what we can to comply with that requirement, I should say. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Chelsea, I've got a couple of questions regarding the Texas Workforce investigations. Have any of those, I guess I'm just trying to get an understanding. I understand now how many we have in that process. Have we had any come out of that process?
We have had some come out of that process. Do you want to come talk about it?
Yeah.
I'm unsure of the outcome of all of those that we've seen, so I think Melissa is best suited.
Good morning. So we've sent a total of 7 to the Workforce Commission. We have 5 that are still pending investigation. 1 came back. that TWC declined to investigate due to non-compliance from the complainant, non-cooperation. And then one that was declined by TWC, but referred to HUD because it was a protected class that Texas doesn't consider, but the federal regulations do consider a protected class, and that was sexual orientation.
Okay, so how long did those, I guess we really don't have a good understanding what a investigation by TWC looks like yet. Because I was wondering how long that process might take, but if they're declined, the ones we've seen have been declined, I guess we can't answer that yet.
Yeah, and when she said 6, that was my immediate thought is to that enforcement. We have really talked a lot about we don't want our license holders to be out there in limbo for a really long time. And so now that we see that there's 6 and this just started, we want to make sure that maybe enforcement digs into how long that happens, because we don't want our license holders to, be out there.
Yeah, I would love to have a discussion about this in the enforcement committee meeting that we will be setting, and just so we can kind of get our just a little bit better understanding of what exactly the process is and what are the results and what do we do with them.
Yeah, maybe we talk to TWC and get them to participate in the meeting and let us know what do they envision a typical timeline would be. We certainly don't want our license holders out there with this hanging over their head for 3 years or, something. So
Yeah.
I think that's worth investigating.
I can definitely work with TWC. We've been in contact with them, checking on the statuses of these frequently. I think there's one that's pretty close to being done and is going to come back, but as soon as we get data on that, I will let you guys know. I think the ones that go to HUD, we might have to figure out a little bit more, because they're really backlogged on the amount of complaints they have. But I'll bring all of those things to enforcement.
And so remind me how the process goes. The complaint comes in, and we let the appraiser know that it's come in, but it's going to be abated because it's going to TWC, and so they're aware of it.
Yeah, they're
the
aware.
complaint. Okay.
And then TWC reaches out to them too. So there's no lapse in communication with
There's no covert investigation.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Very good.
Thanks, Melissa.
Melissa, while you're here, can you remind me, when I'm looking at page 129 at the applications, so these are only new applications, is that correct? So even for the trainees, I mean, I know it is for the other license types, but even for the trainees, so a trainee does their initial application, and that's what we see in this count here, and then renewals go in a different count.
Yep.
So the only way, in a sense, that we would be seeing somebody appear on this twice is when they apply for their trainee, then we see them again apply for our original application for general or residential.
There might be circumstances where people apply for a license category and they apply for another license category. So if they're upgrading, that's like one circumstance where you might see double counted.
Okay.
Another is if they can't complete the requirements within a year and they apply again. So those might show up twice.
I see. Okay, so those, okay, for the most part, okay. While you're here too, I just wanted to mention that the processing times on that we can see on page 130 continue to look great, and and now that we're having, because of the influx of trainees, we're now seeing an uptick in the general and residential, which we would hope to have happened, and so I'm glad that has happened, but we have continued to keep the processing times down, and so we definitely commend staff for that is still going well, and that we have worked out the kinks, and we're getting people into the industry, so we very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything for Melissa while she's up here?
Members look good.
Thank you.
Anything for the commissioner? Mr. Slagle, good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I guess so. Good morning, Chair and board members. Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner. I just wanted, before I get into what I was going to talk about, division on the education and the customer relations division, I just wanted to mentioned that I'd sent out the agency, this new agency-wide operations report on, I believe, the 1st. It replaces the customer service report you used to get that was so focused on the contact center data. This is more broadly, it's a broader report dealing with all of the agency divisions to try, or most of the agency divisions, try to give you a broader context of what's going on to help you guys understand that more. So I hope that was helpful, and I am, of course, open to any suggestions any of you have on information that you'd like to see added to that. Essentially, it'll be a reflection of the previous month's data because it'll be based on the staff reports that you all get at the end of the month, and then just sort of looking at some trends that staff thinks might be helpful to point out at that point. So again, just let me know if you need anything added to that. I did want to touch base just on a couple of items related to the customer relations division and the educations division. I mentioned in that report that the calls for January were up slightly they were up, the volume was up, but also the hold time was up. The result of that, or the reason that happened, was because we had some technical issues in the Capitol complex, which is agency-wide. Our phone system is operated by DIR, and a lot of agencies had the same issue. We actually had to shut the phones down, I think, at least 3 times in January because of that, because people would be stuck on hold, but we couldn't get to them. So rather than have them sitting out there not understanding, we cut the phones down, put a message on the website, had people contact us via email. The division was able to answer all emails within 24 hours. That was a good way to do that. That all has been taken care of, but you will see an uptick in the hold time, just over about 2 minutes for January, which is still, considering all of the issues, good. We also had people out with some illnesses, and we're down a couple of staff. There are currently 3 people training, which should be on the phone soon, which will help with that as always. Just to let you know, this month, even though we've had a significant weather event in Texas, the calls haven't stopped. We've been averaging what we normally average. It hasn't been as high in some places, but it was I think around 800 calls, which is about average what we get daily, and we've been able to answer those without any issues, even with people having power issues at home and stuff. So that's good to know. And then in terms of education, I just wanted to point out that as I mentioned, the course applications and approvals have decreased slightly over in comparison to the last couple of fiscal years, but we don't really see the bulk of those applications until the spring and the summer. So I don't think anybody's too worried about that. They'll probably have an uptick based on that. I did want to point out, and I'm sure all of you have seen this, but the first-time pass rate for the first 4 months has gone up. Overall. Jen and I were talking about that, Jen Wheeler, the director of the Education Division, and we think it's likely based on the fact that the exams were updated in January of 2022, and they hadn't been updated for 5 years. So it just took them a while to get to the point of making them a little bit more, a little better to reflect on that. But those have increased. And that's really all I wanted to point out. The commissioner pointed out all of the rest of the stuff. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I am going to be given a ledge report later. I didn't want you to think I was not doing that. So that'll be later in the agenda.
Can you tell me what you mean by they updated the exam? I thought that it was a constantly updating. Isn't that what we were told, that they were constantly putting new questions and revising it?
Jen Wheeler will come up and explain that.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. It's my understanding that they are constantly monitoring the performance of the exam, but that they do a bigger overhaul every 5 years. And so I think they've been gathering input over the course of, always, and then really made some more substantial changes in January. So I think it's kind of an ongoing process, but also an every 5 year, they do a big deep dive.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we did discuss this in the Education Committee portion of it, and yeah, we had noted that there was an increase in things. I was wondering, well, I mean, that's great, I just didn't realize that may have been the trigger or the reason that happened. So.
And I think in our
no, go ahead.
In our kind of constant communications with them over the last several years in regard to exam pass rates may have been a little bit of the impetus to
do the update.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like we've been having this conversation for years, and we've always been under the impression that it was an ever-changing thing. So maybe I'm misunderstanding what this term update is, but that's a little bit concerning. But I'm glad that they did it, so.
Good job.
It was my understanding as well that there was questions that were thrown out. There were new questions put in every year or whatever iteration that was. And yeah, I was unaware of the 5-year rule, which is, it was.
Can we
guess
get
good
some
to know.
clarification on that?
Yeah,
I'll
that-
certainly.
Just so that when education is kind of diving into those numbers, that we have some context, because if we've been misunderstanding how the exam goes, then.
It's kind of tough when you're in the dark on the testing side and what their machinations are.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, but that's always been the case. So we're playing from behind most of the time, but getting that info would be helpful.
I'll certainly get more detailed information and bring it back to the education.
Yeah, I think there should be some transparency there on the AQB's part about the exam, and I mean, especially considering the issues that we've had with it.
But it is encouraging to see these
Absolutely.
past, so maybe, as you said, the continuous communication and
Absolutely.
maybe badgering, hopefully by,
The badgering.
by us and the bigger states asking about the completing, maybe the barriers to entry, that kind of thing. Maybe that was something that kind of spurred that.
Well, and
that
I believe it's been a nationwide conversation, right? You know, in
I
all the
hope so,
different
right.
communications we've had with the chair of the AQB, and so. But yeah, I'm happy to get, just kind of some more detail on exactly what their process is.
Yeah, if it's not publicly available, maybe we could just reach out to them and just kind of
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jen.
get a little clarification on that.
Definitely.
That way, just moving forward, we know what to expect and what can be asked of them. But, okay, very good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me?
Thank you, Mr. Slagle.
Thank you.
This brings us to agenda items number 14 and 15, which we will discuss together. Mrs. Santos, these start on page 145 of our materials. And you might already be covering this, but are we going to try and do this in one motion, both of them? Okay.
Hello again, board members. Discussion and possible action to adopt a repeal of 22 Texas Administrative Code 153.24 complaint processing, and also to adopt 22 Texas Administrative Code 153.24 and 153.241. So before you are one rule that we are splitting apart into two, and there are no substantive changes. We did receive one comment, but it didn't address any of the proposed changes at all. So staff's recommendations here is to adopt the repeal of the rule and the new rules as presented.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption the repeal of 22 Texas Administrative Code 153 Tech 24 and new rules 22 Tech 153 Tech 24 and 153 Tech 241 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion about these rule changes? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Santos. Now that brings us to agenda item number 16, which is executive session. We will be taking an executive session today, but we anticipate it to be just about 45 minutes, so it should be pretty quick for those of you that are in the audience. The time is 10 o'clock, and the board will now go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071 and personnel matters pursuant to Texas Government Code 551074. We anticipate returning to open session in 45 minutes, so at about 10:45. Time is 10:50, and the board is back from executive session and reconvening in open session. We are on agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action regarding recommendations from the executive committee regarding the mentor application cycle. This is on page 157 in our materials. Mrs. Santos.
Yes. If you recall an earlier item, you all appointed mentors, board mentors. This item is something that staff had brought to the executive committee as a way to kind of keep our mentorship program healthy. And currently, we appoint board mentors every February for 2 years. And the thought to keep that program healthy was to continue that 2-year commitment, but appoint every February so that we're not waiting for someone to hit that 10-year requirement, and we just sort of can capture people into the program as soon as they can qualify. And so staff's recommendation here is to move that appointment process to every February for 2-year terms.
Easy enough. We appreciate everybody identifying ways to offer more options to our license holders.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Reed Lynch.
I move that the board adopt the executive committee's recommendation as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. McAnally. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 17B.
Discussion and possible action regarding the recommendations from the executive committee regarding the delegation of authority to approve and sign agreed orders and voluntary surrenders. So currently the board has a process that they've delegated authority to the chair to sign and approve agreed final orders, involuntary surrenders. And this is adopted, I believe, originally as an efficiency measure. These are agreements that both staff and a respondent typically have agreed to, and it's just another layer of agreeing or approving that agreement. If it wasn't delegated, it'd have to go to the full board. We meet quarterly, so this was really some oversight in conjunction with efficiency. One thing that the current policy doesn't state specifically is when a respondent requests to modify that agreed final order. And the circumstances when this has come up historically is meeting a deadline, which almost always has been they've got a medical issue, they need to push back 30 days. And so the current requirements still require that to be approved by the board. And so this was something that staff brought to the executive committee to potentially amend the policy to include that modification process where the chair could approve and sign those modifications that were agreed to by both respondent and staff.
And this change would be because it's either the chair or vice chair that signs those, or it goes down the line like that. So this would be whoever signed the original one would sign the change. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that the board adopt the revised delegation of authority to approve and sign agreed orders and voluntary surrender policy as presented.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 18 is discussion regarding the performance review and salary of the commissioner. So just as a reminder, TREC holds the authority for action as it relates to the commissioner's employment and salary. But they do seek input from the board, which we obviously appreciate. And this year, the commission meeting is happening after the board meeting in which they'll address this. So we will have to wait for them to take formal action on it. But we did talk about this in executive session, the commissioner's performance review. And as part of the review, they survey all 9 TREC commissioners and all 9 board members, and then they do a survey of staff. So they start with the staff that directly reports to the commissioner, and then they do a sampling of other staff so that they can, get sort of a cross sample of everyone else that interacts with the commissioner. And again, the commissioner got glowing reviews from staff. It's very apparent that her staff trusts her and appreciates the trust that she puts in them in delegating authority to them and the trust that breeds both ways. We talked about how to improve in any way that we can. The board gave the commissioner very high marks in our survey. Things are going well. We appreciate the relationship that we have with the commissioner. It makes things certainly much easier for us as policymakers to have a good relationship with the commissioner and staff. And so we very much appreciate the commissioner and look forward to taking action on this item at their next meeting. I will open the floor for any additional comments from board members. I will take that silence as concurrence. Agenda item number 18 is the update regarding legislative matters. Mr. Slagle.
Good morning, Board Chair and board members. Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner. I'm going to provide a legislative update. I did send out a report, I believe it was about almost a week and a half ago, at that time detailing the bills that were priority one bills that have some impact on the agency in one way or another. They're not, that report wasn't inclusive of all the bills we're monitoring. There's other bills that deal with more administrative things. I'm happy to share any of those with you, but didn't want to overwhelm you with the fact that we are, as of this morning, looking at 148 bills, and the vast majority of those are bills that we've got to monitor just in case something happens, but likely won't impact the agency in any way. We prioritize them in 3 different sections, 1, 2, and 3. And 2 and 3 are bills that don't directly impact the agency, but we watch them just in case there's a change in either the caption's broad enough to where the language could change, where it could include us, or there's just some cursory thing we need to watch. So, but again, I'm happy to share any of that information with you. I did just want to focus on a couple of bills from that report and that we're monitoring that would be of interest to you. The first, there's only one bill that directly impacts the board right now that's been officially filed, and that's HB 1518 by Darby. That is the bill that deals with appraisal reviews. It was filed by REVA, and it essentially changes the statutory requirements for doing periodic reviews for AMCs. And so that bill's been filed. There was some communication with the agency about certain issues, and so we did provide some feedback on some of the language going forward. But essentially what that bill would do is it would take the specifics out of of it being an appraisal review and leave it up to the AMC to determine how they would do those periodic reviews. But the AMC also has to have something in place that explains how they're doing that. It would also remove the requirement that an appraiser do them. It just needs to be somebody who's knowledgeable about USPAP. So it takes a little bit of the burden off of the AMC in terms of that. In terms of our housekeeping bill, those have been, that language has been submitted to both the House and the Senate sponsor. That has not been officially filed yet. There's still a little bit of give and take on some of the language, mainly where it should go in the statute. And as this process happens, when you're dealing with this, sometimes there's some differences of opinion about where certain language needs to go in terms of fulfilling the intent of that. So that's kind of where we are. We're thinking that'll likely be filed in the next week or two officially, and we'll see that. And of course, I'll submit that and send that to you guys as soon as we see it. Any questions about either of those before I continue? Okay, just to touch on a couple of other bills of interest. There is the first two I'd like to talk about deal with agency rules. That's HB 139 by Click, and that's relating to the provision and notice of certain proposed rules by a state agency. Essentially, what that bill does is if there is a statutory, if there is a proposed rulemaking by the agency, and that results in a statutory change, the notice that we provide explaining what the bill is to the Texas Register, we have to note which bill that comes from. And I think we do that anyway, but we have to know what bill that comes from. The other requirement would be that we would have to send that to the author of that bill that we're proposing a rule based on that. So that is the first one. The second one is SB 506, which relates to a state agency's authority to adopt rules that require a person to pay a fee or taxes. Essentially, that prohibits an agency from adopting a rule that requires a person to pay a fee if the agency has not already explicitly been granted authority to do so. We both the board and the commission have broad rulemaking authority in terms of fees as an SDSI agency. So that bill does not necessarily impact us, but we are watching it to see if there's something that would change on that. Any questions?
So notifying the bill author, so what if it's 10 years from now and they're no longer in the legislature?
That's a good question. I don't know how that would proceed. I would probably need to get some
And
clarification.
the intent of that, I assume, is that when you make a rule, they want to make sure it is consistent with the legislative intent of the bill. Is that yeah?
I
Okay.
think that's exactly right. Exactly right. There's been some movement over the last couple of years in the session to get the legislature more involved in that sort of executive division part of things in terms of the rulemaking. So I think that's just part of that process.
Okay.
Okay, the next two deal with agency finances, and that's HB 760 by Goodwin, which relates to the amount of monthly longevity pay that we pay that is paid to state employees. So currently, state employees receive $20 of longevity pay for each month of pay each month for every 2 years of service they have. This bill would increase that to 50, and as an SCSI agency, that of course impacts the bottom line here. We're looking at the exact impact on that for the commission and the board. I will provide that information in the next report. We do have some numbers. I just want to make sure that what you see is you're able to say, okay, this is board related rather than just agency wide related, because that we're just clarifying that stuff. So you will see that information in terms of what the estimated cost that might be if that bill were to move forward. And the second one is HJR 5, which is a constitutional amendment to increase the minimum amount the state contributes to the employee retirement system. Again, as an SDSI agency, that is something that we're not allocated that money through appropriations. It's something we need to do, so that would have an impact on the agency as well. So we're watching both of those to see, and we'll provide you guys with more insight in terms of what the financial impact that may be on the agency. Any questions about either of those two, Bill? Okay. And the last one I want to talk about, you've seen this one before. This has been filed in a couple of sessions. It essentially addresses governor appointees, and it limits the amount an appointee or a proposed appointee can contribute to the governor in terms of political contributions, and it's limited to no more than $2,500. And if an appointee does, well, appointee is prohibited, a current appointee is prohibited from going above that, and anyone who is considered an appointee, if they've done that in the past, is prohibited from being appointed, according to this bill. So that's just something, as governor appointees, I wanted you to be aware of. Again, it's been filed in the past and has not moved. I don't know if it'll move this session or not, but I just wanted you to know about it.
Tony?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. So currently there's no limit. This is just something being proposed. As
I said, it's been
that would be, I mean, appointees is in like ourselves, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, yes, and it's been filed in the past, and you know, it's no indication that it's failing last session's no indication it'll fail this session, but you never know. It's the governor has a final say on all bills, so you know.
Yeah. Okay, this is just kind of a FYI point of information.
So
okay,
that's really the only bills I wanted to point out to you. As I said, I think the next update report to be emailed to you guys will be in, I think, next week, maybe. We're trying to get them out every 2 weeks. So there'll be likely some additional bills that impact overall occupational licenses agencies that have been filed since then. Those will impact the board because you're an occupational licensing agency, obviously. But if there is anything ever on these you have any questions about, if you know of a bill that you've seen that's not on this, let us know. We may be prioritizing it differently, and we're happy to move it up or address why we're prioritizing it differently. But I just want to make sure you're informed with what's going on. So anything you need or any additions or questions, Summer, who is helping with this, and I are very happy to answer those.
And when is the bill filing deadline?
March 10th, Friday, March 10th.
Okay, so we're well ahead of that.
We are, and we will, it's funny, there are bills filed after that, you know, still, but that's when we'll see an influx of bills, usually the week before that date. People will start trying to get ahead of that deadline. And so at that point, the next report will probably not be inclusive of everything, just because we'll be catching up with what we're trying to do, but we'll try to get as quickly as possible an updated report to you after that date.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Agenda item number 20 is discussion and possible action regarding the submission of comments in response to the AQB's exposure draft for changes to the criteria. This was, they released this earlier this week, so it came to us in supplemental materials. Mrs. Santos.
Yes. So as you're all aware, the AQB sets the minimum qualification standards for appraisers, and this is the method that they propose. As we propose new rules, this is sort of their method. They have exposure drafts that they propose changes, they get comments, and then they as a board meet and adopt those changes. You know, as Commissioner Buckholz mentioned earlier, there hasn't been a whole lot of time that we've internally had to sit with this and kind of contemplate what all these things mean for us from an implementation standpoint. I think it came out late Tuesday, so it really hasn't even been out in the world for 72 hours yet. And so what I prepared today is kind of like more of a high-level bullet point overview of what the proposed changes are. And then, you know, internally, we still would like some more time to kind of dig in and, you know, we need some time to figure out what all the implications are today. But with that said, with the overview of the changes, you know, I think we can kind of summarize or put these changes in 3 buckets. There's changes to qualifying education, there's changes to continuing education, and then there's name changes that are a little less significant in compared to all the other changes. First of all, the topic of valuation bias, fair housing laws and regulation is being added to both qualifying education and continuing education. For qualifying education, this would add 8 hours of training on this topic. And there's a very helpful chart on page 19 of the supplement that kind of lists out with each license type what the implications are. Looking at the trainee qualifying education and then licensed residential education, they'll be actually adding 8 hours to the total hours of qualifying education to those license types. For certified residential and certified general, 8 hours on this topic is going to be required, but it's not resulting in a net gain of hours. It's going to be reallocated with hours that are already earmarked for electives on this topic. So in terms of additional hours, it's those licensed residential and trainee license types that are getting additional hours on this topic. And moving on to the continuing education, there's going to be an initial 7-hour course that needs to be completed by December 31st, 2025, that all credentialed appraisers will have to take. And then starting the very next day on January 1st, 2026, there's going to be a 4-hour refresher course that needs to be completed. And the explanation they provide in the exposure draft is that there's sort of an initial onloading of information and then an upkeep refresher course that would continue forward. And then the same topics are identical for the qualifying education as the continuing education. That extra hour is just for the examination that would be associated with that course for those who are taking it for qualifying education. And there is a webinar on March 1st. The information how to register and attend is on page 4 of the supplemental materials. It should open up a link for you all to register and attend. Comments are going to be due by March 13th for written comments, but there is an option to say verbal comments at their March 22nd meeting for the AQB. In terms of for our recommendations at this point, I mean, I think for us staff to be able to sit and figure out what all the implications are, you know, it would be to potentially delegate that authority to the Education Licensing Committee to move forward with comments or to kind of have that discussion, just because that gives us some time. And then, you know, there's some time until that March 13th deadline to submit comments as well. So there is some time to make that determination.
Okay. And so I think that really what we're contemplating today is Every time these exposure drafts come out, we don't have to make a comment as a board. That's not necessary. It is, do we feel compelled to make a comment about these changes? And I think that we would decide if staff, part of this is how would this be implemented, right? When we add hours and that sort of thing, and how does that impact staff? And so they would kind of have that portion of any kind of response is how do we administratively do this, and is it difficult for us, and do we have any comments about that? And then I think the other thing from the board members is, do we feel supportive of this? Do we not care? Do we want to submit comments? Do we feel passionately enough to submit comments? And with one voice as a board, I think today would provide an opportunity for us to sort of talk about it. And if we decide we do want to, then we could delegate that to the Education Committee so that we can meet that March 13th deadline. But so that's sort of the opening the floor for discussion about whether or not these changes are something that we have a strong opinion about. For me, the adding 8 hours to the trainee, to the total trainee hours, I hate that it increases the burden. That's what we've been trying to get away from. But at the same time, I understand that this is something that needs, to be addressed, and this is the solution that they have come up with. So I don't know that I feel passionately about pushing back on that. It also increases the hours for the licensed residential as well, just not the certified residential or certified general. So, and then the only other thing is those of us that would be in the continuing ed cycle is that, of course, when you take 8 hours or 7 hours, 7 hours doesn't seem, like a lot of time, but our continuing ed requirement is only 28 hours. So when you do 7 hours of USPAP and 7 hours of bias, then it obviously limits the number of hours that appraisers are taking for electives. And I just consider that, and then when it turns to 4 hours, then then we only have 17 hours of electives as opposed to 21. And again, I don't know that seems like a huge amount of difference, but I also think that in addition to having appraisers talk about and learn about bias, that it's also helpful that they're talking about and learning about the sales comparison approach and the cost approach and the other things that that everyone, including people of color, are served by appraisers being more knowledgeable in those topics. And so, again, I don't like that, but I don't have a different solution, and don't feel passionate enough about the people who have sat down and come up with a solution to, push back on it. So,
Madam Chair, I don't know that we as a board need to, but it seems to me that the valuation bias and fair housing laws and regulation, that's applicable in many of these topics, including principles and procedures. And why wouldn't they break that down? And again, this is me just musing here, but I mean, that would be an opportunity to not only just take the course and you're done, but reinforce throughout your education that's simply, I mean, bias or lack of bias is a foundation of appraisal regardless.
Right.
So anyway, that's like I said,
an interesting point, because when you talk about the sales comparison approach and choosing comparables, isn't bias part of that? Isn't that a natural place that you would be talking about bias?
Agreed.
So I don't, maybe after we watch the webinar and can kind of get a little bit better feel of how they came up with this. I always hate that we just say this, okay, let's just add more hours on this and check that box, and it's not really helping anything. That's certainly not what we want to do. So,
well, I would say also is that adding 8 more hours to your qualifying education is another barrier to entry.
Right.
That if that curriculum could be incorporated into some of the other courses without adding hours, that would be my preference.
That's a great idea. My last USPAP class, the 7-hour update, the instructor spent at least 3 hours on this topic. And at the same time, I understand that. However, it prevented me from getting my questions answered and information I felt like I needed from USPEP. You know,
Yeah.
it was more on that one topic when I needed questions answered. I needed to be updated on the information I took the class for.
Well, right, but if they're not updating USPAP now on every 2-year cycle, then couldn't it be part of those 7 hours? I mean, I don't know if we as a board, do we feel passionate enough to say, you know, we aren't opposed to the solution, but have you considered building it into all the other specific areas of education that we get? Because it really is part of all the components.
And I think, and again, just my opinion here, but the barrier to entry is that now you've got to take another class when it seems to me that you could incorporate that into some or all of the other curriculum as a way to get that information to the trainee, but at the same time, don't make it harder for the trainee to get their license.
It almost seems like it would also be more impactful if it's part of all of the other training, that it's, instead of its separate thing, that it's reiterated in sales comparison and in cost approach and in ethics, and that it's sort of sprinkled throughout so that it's not, you know, so that people can think of the applicability of bias.
Exactly.
In different parts of the appraisal process, you're going to have the potential for bias and influence, undue influence, whether it be in the approaches, or it could be in your scope, or it could be, you know, I don't know where else, but your reconciliation, who knows?
Right.
But all of those are things that you're supposed to be unbiased, and so it seems to me that that would be an important component to each one of those, of that curriculum.
Right, when you're describing the site or the improvements or what, like, let's talk about how bias could come into each one of those steps in the process, as opposed to just taking the class and then trying to apply it to all of the.
I'd like to see that myself as one of our comments.
Yeah.
You know.
So maybe, am I hearing that the board does feel like that we want to provide comments to this, and that maybe it has to do with the barriers to entry and maybe finding a better way to incorporate this, that we definitely are supportive of incorporating valuation bias, but we would like to see it in a more holistic way?
So I'm wondering if we're looking at this, adding modules to each one of those portions of our qualifying and continuing education portions to each portion, instead of having an 8-hour class. I'm sure that the AQB would get pushback from the providers having to change every single one of their classes instead of just adding one class.
Yeah, I wonder how,
as well.
I wonder how often that happens, or how that, I guess we would probably need to know more about how classes are approved. How is the curriculum for each class approved, and how difficult would that be of an ask? Maybe that's why they didn't.
Because I would assume that since they're changing, if we're taking your criteria, that they would have to get approval for each one of those classes, since they're changing those classes again, since they would have to get approval for that class, that certain class, and instead of just getting approval for one class.
Right.
And I don't know, once again, I don't know the process.
But is it easier to ask the education providers to change that than all the states to change
their
criteria? Yeah, licensing criteria.
I certainly see your point, but at the same time, our responsibility is to our stakeholders, our license holders, and not the education providers. I mean, they're going to adapt.
They're going to, yeah, I agree. They're going to. The additional barriers to entry really kind of make that kind of difficult. And in Martha Gale's discussion about USPAP, as they did not do updates on USPAP, or haven't done them as periodically as they have, I think it's interesting that bias and that portion of it was the bulk of it.
Significant.
And I think and maybe that's the reasoning behind it, that is, since USPAP's not being updated, well, this is the topic that needs to be focused on in a continuing basis.
Yeah, I think that was sort of their Band-Aid until they could make these changes,
Right.
was
I
to put it
agree.
into USPAP so that we're not waiting until 2025
Right.
to address the issue.
But maybe my take was it just slightly different. When we were at the Aero conference, this was discussed extensively. And I took the impression that the presenters were telling us as the audience that this bias issue needs to be standalone. It needs to be something not just wedged in for 3 hours of a 7-hour USPAP course, but to stand alone and spend more time. I mean, I hear what you all are saying. I'm just trying to get into the mindset of this by the AQB, since this is in its 4th exposure draft. And I don't know, maybe some of the providers out there have already started or formulating a bias course that's standalone already. So I see a nod in the affirmative on that. So I think what y'all are saying is very logical. I'm just wondering if this has been discussed or debated at the AQB level, and they say, no, we thought that way, this is the best way. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask that question.
So maybe we ask the Education Committee that in preparation for the Education Committee meeting, that staff looks into how did they come up with this recommendation? Did they, you might.
Well, I've followed some of they've had working groups, they've had a lot of talking pre-exposure draft forums, and it was all these various parties that had an interest, providers, fair housing advocates, and appraisers. And so I know a lot of the hour requirements, a lot of it was related to some states already have a requirement out there. And so there are courses that do exist. And so it was sort of framing that with what's already out there. And at the same time, and some of your concerns I heard in those forums was that, can you incorporate this in a practical way of how appraisers are in what they do at different stages of that appraisal process? And I think in their outline here of the specific course content, they do have a case studies section that's incorporated in this. That's, the topic, but also best practice is incorporated in that outline. And so I don't know if that helps in your determination here, but I know a lot of the comments you have made have been things that were mentioned and said to the AQB.
So then maybe it doesn't hurt to say we would like to see something that is incorporated into all education. That would be our preference, and they might say we already considered that. I mean, that doesn't hurt to say that, right? That would be that we are sensitive to barriers to entry. And also feel like there's a better way to do this, but maybe you've considered it, but that's just our comment. And then whatever, if staff has any input on the, implementing this change, then that would be added to the letter as well. Does that sound like a good solution between everybody? And then the Education Committee can just make sure that you schedule your meeting. Maybe it would be helpful to do it that March 1st to March 13th is sort of a short time frame, but I'll let y'all figure that out. If you want to schedule it after the March 1st webinar to get a better understanding of how they came up with these, or if that doesn't leave enough time to create the response, I'll let the two of you, Ms. Santos and Mr. Castro, work that out on timing. Does that have the support of the board? Very good.
So just for my understanding, and just to make sure I have it clear, it's the comment of considering incorporating these topics within existing courses?
Right. In every course.
In every course.
Right.
Versus
yeah.
specific.
Right. And and not adding hours, because, we know that barriers of entry affect everyone, but they certainly affect, people that are less advantaged greater. So how many hours is it, how much does it cost for an extra 8 hours, you know, when you're trying to become a trainee?
Time and money.
Right.
And then, and again, just so I'm also clear, delegate authority to the Education Licensing Committee to, I guess, final language or consideration of that, and then anything additional that staff can identify.
Correct.
Between now and then.
Right, so delegate the authority to the Education Committee to approve the final wording of the letter.
If everyone, I think unanimous consent, if everyone's in agreement with that, I don't think we require a motion, but I just want to make sure everybody's.
Yeah.
Agreement.
Thank you.
Yeah. Agenda item number 21 is discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. I can't think of any that, that were brought up today that we need to put forward. Agenda item number 22, discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting dates. So calendars, as per usual, are on the last page of our materials. We have previously set the date of May 19th and August 18th for our next two board meetings. Just want to confirm that nobody has any conflicts with those dates. And y'all would like for us to set the November board meeting. So looking at the November calendar, of course, Thanksgiving is the week of the 24th. I hate to do the 17th because I feel like people sometimes travel for that whole week, so that kind of messes, especially with the people who are coming in from out of town. So what about November 10th? November 11th is Veterans Day. Does that impact a 10th meeting date for anyone? Yes, ma'am.
I would say that's typically our workshop.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Any conflicts with the 9th, 10th on the Trek side? I didn't see that they had any dates published on there. Are we scheduling out farther than they are now at this point?
It's pretty good. And with the executive session, I think we had one that was short, but it's pretty good. Yeah, we have some that were good. No, we had maybe one. They were right.
Well, so should we just set the tentative dates of the 9th and 10th, and then if we find that Trek has some?
I don't have their stuff.
Okay. So we will tentatively set the workshop and board meeting for November 9th and 10th. Very good. If there is nothing else, the time is 11:29 and this meeting is adjourned. Everyone be safe in your travels home. Stay warm.
Thank you.